Okay, I apologize. I don't know what happened. I was off an hour. I literally, maybe you saw me outside the door. I just lost track of the time, and I thought I was coming 11:40 when it was whatever. Okay, so I don't know what happened. I guess maybe I had what they call a senior moment. I hope not, but okay. All right. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about some aspects of Purim. And that is a very interesting issue that maybe it's a feminist issue, but it's a very halakhically interesting issue about women and Magilla. The Gemara tells us, the Maseches Magilla, that Noshim are chayavais in Magilla. Women are chayavais in Magilla. Now, what's the Havamina? Because Magilla is a mitzvah saseh shezman grama, a time-bound commandment. So logically, women should be exempt from Magilla. So why are they chayav? So the Gemara says, Af hein hayu bioso hanes, because they too were chayav. They too were in the nes of Purim. Now, what does it mean? Af hein hayu bioso hanes. In other words, Maclocus, Rashi, and Taisus. Rashi says, Af hein hayu bioso hanes means women were the iker nes of Purim, because the Yeshua of Hashem came through Esther Hamalka that galvanized the Jewish people to fast and do tshuva. Taisvis says that's not mashma. The words afhein, they were also in the miracle. That does not carry an implication that they were the Iker Hanes. So Tosfos simply learns they were also included in the Gezerah, right? Haman's Gezerah was lahashmid ulaharek. So women were nichlal in the Gezerah of lahashmid ulaharek. Now, the Gemara uses afein hayu bioso hanes to override the exemption of Zman Grama. That's what it's doing. It does it in 3 places in Shas. So make note of these 3 places. It does it in Mikra Magilla. In Arvei Psachim, it does it, women are chayavais in the 4 kosos of Yayin, even though it's a Zman Grama, because Afein Hayu Bioso Anes. And the 3rd case is Maseches Shabbos, women are chayavais in Ner Chanukah, because Afein Hayu Bioso Anes. So remember the 3 cases. Ner Chanukah, Dalid Kosos, Mikra Magilla. Now, Rashi and Tosfos go l'shitasam in each of those 3 cases. Remember, according to Rashi, Afein hayu bioso hanes mean women have to be the Iker Hanes. So by Magilla, they're the Iker Hanes because of Esther. What about Dalid Kosos? Well, Dalid Kosos is because of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And Chazal say, in the merit of righteous women, we were redeemed. So they were the Iker Hanes. Chanukah is already a little harder to find, but Rashi says, like the Maisa of Yehudis, right? Yehudis, the story of Chanukah, she killed one of the major generals, etc. So a woman was responsible for a much Yeshua. Tosfos l'shitasai learns in all 3 cases that a woman doesn't have to be the Iker Hanes. It just means by Purim, men and women were saved from death. By Pesach, men and women were redeemed from Mitzrayim. By Chanukah, men and women were saved from the Gezeros of Antiochus. Be it as it may, whether you learn like Rashi or you learn like Tosfos, the Gemara uses Afhein Hayu Bioso Hanes to override the patur of mitzvah saseh shezman grama. There is a patur called mitzvah saseh shezman grama. Af hein hayu bioso hanes overrides that patur and creates a chiyuv for women. Yeah.
How does Tosfot understand Sukkot and Shavuot? The Anania covered were under the women were also protected by that. And
Well, I don't know what you mean. What part of Shavuot are they not obligated? I mean, Sukkot is a good question, but you mean Sukkot?
Yeah, I guess
just
Sukkot.
Sukkot. Yeah, that's a good question. Why don't, as women are exempt from Sukkah, right? Women are exempt from Sukkah and from Lulav and Esrog. Well, actually, okay, I'll give you an answer to that. In other words, with something else Taisa says. Yeah, the answer will be very good. The Gemara says in Arvei Psachim that women are chayavais in matzah, the first night of Pesach. Why? Because the Torah juxtaposes the Isser of Chametz, the negative commandment of Chametz, and the positive commandment of Matzah. It says, Leiseichel olav Chametz, Shivat Yamim Tochel olav Matzos. So we have a drasha, anybody who has the negative, and women certainly have the negatives, will also have the positive. We make the same drasha for why women are chayav in Kiddush on Shabbos, even though it's a Zman Grama, because Shamor and Zochor. Zochor is the positive of Kiddush. Shamor is not doing malacha. Hashem said them b'dibur echad, whoever has the negative has the positive. So Frek Taisus, going back to Matzah, why do I need a hekesh of the negative and the positive? Why can't I use the svara of Dalit Kaises? Afein hayu bioso anes. So Tosas's answer is that Afein hayu bioso anes is only valid on a rabbinic level to be mechayev women in a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Look at the three cases. Magilla is d'Rabbanan, even though it's in Tanakh, but anything after Moshe Rabbeinu is d'Rabbanan. Ner Chanukah is midrabanan, and Dalit Kaisis is midrabanan. But on a level of a mitzvah d'Oraisa, it cannot override Zman Grama, and that's why by matzah I need a hekesh. Taisus' Yisaid will answer your question. Mimela, by sukkah, where you don't have a hekesh or a gezeres hakosov, we're going to go back to Zman Grama, even if it's afein hayu bioso, even if afein hayu does apply. Yes, this is very important Yisaid, that afein hayu bioso anes can only be mechayev on a drabanan level. It is not strong enough to be mechayev, whether like Rashi or like Taisus, it is not strong enough to be mechayev on a d'oraisa level. Okay, so now let's raise the following question. If it is indeed the case that a woman is chayav in Megillah just like a man, can a woman read Megillah for a man? Now again, we're not talking about reading it in public in a minyan where there's kol isha. Let's factor out kol isha, let's factor out tznius. Let's talk about a simple situation where the man has his jaws shut because whatever it is, he is sick or had an accident. He can't go to shul. His wife is a mulumedet. A man is allowed to hear his wife sing, at least if she's not a nida. If she is a nida, that's a Maclocus. But stamazai, I can listen to my wife sing. So can my wife read Megillah for me? Right? Is there any problem with that? Now, what's the general rule about being mitzi somebody? Right? We know there's all these mitzvahs that one person could be mitzi somebody else. It's interesting, just as a general rule, one understands you can only be mitzi people in mitzvahs involving sound, not in mitzvahs involving action. For example, I can't take a lulav for you. I can't wear tefillin for you. I can't eat matzah for you. But I can make kiddush for you, right? I can even daven for you. I can bench for you. I can say Shmon Esrei for you. If you listen, that's Chazaras Hashatz. So it's interesting that halacha seems to be machalek between mitzvahs of amira, where there's a principle shomeya ka'ona, that if you listen to it, it's as if you said it, versus mitzvahs of maisa, where it's not shayach for one person to do a maisa for somebody else. The only thing is that I could be mitzi you in shayfer, so that's why I think we have to say it's not so much speech versus action, it seems to be sound versus action. That as long as the mitzvah is a sound mitzvah, meaning a mitzvah that is done either with words or by sound, on that it's shayach shomeya ka'ina. Hearing is as if you did it, but in mitzvahs of action, there is no way one could be mitzi. I can't be mitzi you in a maisa. I can only be mitzi you in a dibor or a kol, and even then you have to be shomeya. In other words, even then, I can't be mitzi you if you're not here to hear it, but if you hear it, shomeya kain. Okay, so everyone knows that that's a very fundamental principle. But the most fundamental idea of Shemea Ka'ina is that the only person who could be mitzi is someone that is a bar chiyuva. You have to be chayav in a mitzvah in order to be mitzi a person. A mitzvah that you're not chayav in, you can't be mitzi. Simple example, a katan cannot be mitzi anybody with kiddush or havdalah or any other mitzvah like that, and that is because a katan is not chayav in a mitzvah. A goy, right? You can have a guy who knows how to blow shofar. You could have a guy who knows how to even read Hebrew. Right? You may have a guy, particularly in Israel. You can have a guy in Israel who knows Hebrew better than many Jews. But a guy cannot make kiddush for me because he's not chayav, right? So this is the famous rule, kol she'eino mechuyav b'davar. If you're not chayav in a mitzvah, you cannot be mitzi somebody else. That's a very important klal in Shemea Ka'ina. Now, vis-a-vis a woman doing a mitzvah for a man, the rule seems to be, if it's a mitzvah a woman is not chayav in, she can't do it for a man. So it's a davar pashut. A woman cannot possibly blow shofar for a man. The reason is, not because it's a man-woman thing, but simply because a woman is not chayav in shofar. It's true that there's a universal minhag that women want to hear shofar, but technically shofar is a mitzvah saseh shezman garama. There is no special reason to be mechayav. So a woman blowing shofar for a man is like a katan blowing shofar for a man, or even like a goy blowing shofar for a man, can't be mitzi. On the other hand, when it comes to a mitzvah that a woman is chayav to do, or chayavis to do, there is no reason she can't do it for a man. An example would be kiddush. Now again, I'm not talking about tznius issues, those are peripheral. Let's simply talk about husband-wife situation. Can a wife make kiddush for her husband? Well, women are chayavos in kiddush. Men are chayavos in kiddush. So a priori, there is no reason why a woman cannot make kiddush for her husband. Again, I know people, for the cameras, I need to say I'm aware of the Night of Yehuda and the different issues, so you don't have to write me about it. Okay. Kiddush happens to be a little bit of a complicated case, but most poskim will say that a woman can be motzi her husband with kiddush. Okay. So based on that logic, if we had to just figure it out, could a woman read Magilla for her husband? The answer would be yes. She's chayavis in Magilla because afein hayu b'yosu anais. He's chayav in Magilla. She could be mitzi because she's a mechuyev b'davar. So indeed, the Shulchan Aruch brings a shita that women could be mitzi men because they're equally mechuyev. But Taisus in Magilla brings a shita of the Bahag. Bahag is an abbreviation, Baal, the author of Hilchos Gedolos. Hilchos Gedolos, Great Halachos, is a very important sefer, actually. It's called the Bahag, is the Machaber, because this is either this or the Sheiltas. These are the two books. They are the first Svarim that were written after the Gemara. Because after the Gemara was written, the Ga'ainim came the period of the Ga'ainim, and the Ga'ainim wanted to begin to give us psak halakha, because the Gemara does not give you psak on many things. And eventually it culminated in the Rambam, the Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, much, much later. But the earliest attempts to give you kind of halachas psukais are from the Ga'ainim. And the two earliest svarim are the Sheiltais of Rav Achai Gaim, that Taisvis occasionally brings, and the Hilchos Gedailais, which is anonymous, but many credit it to Rav Yehudoi Gain, and this is an important source of halacha. So Taisus brings from the Bahag that although women are chayavas in Megillah, they cannot be mitzi men. And the Shulchan Aruch brings this Yesh Omrim, and indeed our minhag is l'chumra, that a woman should not be mitzi a man, even her own husband, in Mikra Megillah. So the question is, what's the hezber of the Bahag? The Bahag is the chayra very shver. Because the only reason a woman cannot blow shofar for a man is only because she's not mechuyev. And if you're not mechuyev, you can't be mitzi. Since Mikra Megillah, she is mechuyeves, that's beferish in halacha. So what would the problem be? Why can't a woman? Now it is a Maclocus. I'm not saying for sure she can't, but why would the Bahag say a woman cannot be mitzi a man? It's fair. L'chayra, if she could be mitzi him in Kiddush, she could be mitzi him in Magilla. So there's a beautiful hesber from the Marcheshes. Again, a little biography. You may not have heard of this person or the Sefer. Rav Chanech Henech Egis, who was a great Talmid Chacham, really, a Gadol B'Torah, who died in the Holocaust, was the head of the Beis Din in Vilna during the years of Rav Chaim Meiser Grodzinski. Rav Chaim Meiser Grodzinski was the Gadol Hador, and he died in 1941, towards the beginning of the Holocaust. But even then, he had arranged for all the yeshivas to go to Shanghai. He was just a brilliant, amazing person. But because he was involved in the whole world, so Vilna itself, the issues of Vilna, which was a big city, he gave over to Rav Chanech Egis. Rav Chanech Egis was kind of de facto the Rav of Vilna. He handled the mikveh, the erev, the shechita, the gittin. So Rav Chanech Egis was Rav Chaim Meiser's right-hand man, and he wrote a sefer, a very, very well-known sefer in the world of Lambdas, called the Marcheshes, which is sugyas, and he goes over different sugyas of Shas with great erudition, great eon. Why did he call it Marcheshes? So if you remember being Maver Cedar last week, Marcheshes is actually mentioned in Parshas Vayikra as one of the ways that you bring a korban mincha to Hashem. Meal offerings. So meal offerings can be brought just by flour and oil, or it can be brought as a fried or baked mincha. And a marcheshes is a mincha that is deep fried. Ma'aseha amukin. It is prepared in a deep vessel. So Rav Chanech Egis called his sefer Marcheshes because he was saying this Torah is prepared in a deep way. It's a deep way, right? So I suppose other people's sefer you might call it machvas. Machvas is Torah prepared in a mincha prepared in a shallow vessel. I'm not a Marcheshes. I'm only a machvas. Okay, right? That's the song Hashomer Shabbos Kebeinu Abbas Lokel Yeratzu Kemincha Al Machvas. Hashem will accept our Shabbos like a mincha that is baked in a shallow vessel. You have to be Mayan in the Zemer. Why B'davka? Okay, but the problem basically is he needed a rhyme, so machlas rhymes with the earlier word. Marcheshes didn't. But okay. But be it as it may, this is what the Marcheshes says. We know that Mikra Megillah technically is midrabanan, even though it's a takana that goes back to Mordechai and Esther, but technically it's midrabanan. But when the Rabbanan created the chiyuv of Mikra Megillah, they actually created two aspects. There are two things you're doing when you're reading Megillah. Two inyanim that you're being Mekayim. One inyan is Pirsumei Nisa. This is the way that we give thanks to Hashem for the miracle of our salvation. There was a death sentence upon us. We could have been wiped out from the face of the earth. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved us. So there's a mitzvah to read and proclaim the miracles of the Chasdei Hashem. Pirsumei Nisa. But there's a second aspect that we're fulfilling in reading Megillah, and that is we are remembering the evil of Amalek. Because remember, Haman is from Amalek. He is called Haman Ha'agagi. Haman from Agag. Now it doesn't call him Amalek Beferish, but we know Agag was the king of Amalek that Shaul HaMelech was supposed to kill. Shaul did not kill Agag, and although Shmuel Hanavi did kill Agag, but Chazal understand that in the brief hiatus, Agag was able to impregnate a woman, and that woman had a child, and that child was the ancestor of Haman, and Haman is a direct descendant, therefore, of Agag, and that's why he is called Haman Ha'agagi. In other words, Haman is Mizera Amalek. I think I told you the other day that the Mefarshim even asked the question, how was Esther and Mordechai, how were they permitted to take Haman's house. You're not allowed to take the property of Amalek. And I remember I gave you a teretz that since Haman had rebelled against the queen, all of his property was forfeited to Achashverosh, and therefore Mordechai and Esther were able to get the property from Achashverosh. They weren't getting it directly from Amalek. Remember, we talked about that. And by the way, this is why Mordechai and Esther were the ones who caused Haman's death, because they are descendants from Shaul. Shaul failed to kill Agag. The descendants of Shaul were given the opportunity to rectify Shaul's Aveira. It's very meduyak that they are descended from Shaul HaMelech. So it turns out when we read about Haman, we are fulfilling the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. Now granted, on Parshasaka, which was last Shabbos, we fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa of remembering Amalek. But the Chachamim imposed a secondary remembrance of Amalek in the reading of Megillah Esther. So in Megillah Esther, the Chachamim put two obligations on us. An obligation to be mefarsem the nes of Hatzalah, and an obligation to remember the evil of Amalek. Two inyanim, Pirsumei Nisa and Zechiras Amalek. And even though you can say, well, didn't we already do that? Parshasaka? Yeah, we did. But the Chachamim were matel an extra chiyuv on Purim itself to remember Amalek. Now, let's ask ourselves a question. Are women chayavais in the mitzvah of remembering the evil of Amalek? Now, your first answer would be, well, of course they're chayavas. Isn't that why we tell women they got to go to shul on Parshasaka, and we have special readings for women? Doesn't that mean women are chayavas? Yes, but that's not so pashut. The Sefer HaChinuch, not the Minchas Chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch, Harisham, actually says women are not chayavas in the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. Why is that? Why wouldn't they be chayav? That's a mitzvah that's 24/7. That's not Siman Garama. Because the following. In Amalek, there are two mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah to remember Amalek, and there's a mitzvah to eradicate Amalek. Now granted, we don't do that mitzvah today because we don't know who they are, but this is Zechira and Mechia. So says the Sefer HaChinuch the following. Women are for sure pater in Mechias Amalek. That's for sure. Because Mechias Amalek is an aspect of armed combat. And women are always exempt from fighting milchama. So that's going to exempt them from Mechia. And that's for sure. The chiddush of the Sefer HaChinuch is remembering Amalek is toloi on the chiyuv to eradicate Amalek. Only the person who is chayav to eradicate is chayav to remember. And since women are pater from eradication, why is that? Because that's milchama. Women are even pater from Zechira. Now, most other Rishonim argue with that. Most other Rishonim say, yeah, women are pater from Mechia, but they're still chayav in Zechira. So according to the Chinuch, if you would ask the Sefer HaChinuch, does my wife have to hear Parshasaka? He would say, no, she doesn't. We are machmir to tell women to hear Parshasaka because we may not paskin like, we're mesubik, do we paskin like the Chinuch. But according to the Chinuch, women are paturot from Zechira because they are patur from Mechia. Again, be sure you understand this. Even the Rishonim that are chaylik on the Chinuch are maida, women are patur from Mechia. That's not the Maclocus. Women are patur from Mechia. The Maclocus is, do you correlate Zechira to Mechia? This is the Sefer HaChinuch. So says the Marcheshas the following chiddush, beautiful, beautiful chiddush. He says that the Bahag course, the Bahag was earlier than the Sefer HaChinuch, so I'm not going to say the Bahag holds like the Chinuch, but the Bahag follows the Shita that the Chinuch articulated, that women are not chayaves in Zechiras Amalek. If that's the case, it turns out that although men and women are both chayavos in Megillah, they're not chayav for the same reason. A man is chayav in Megillah for two reasons: Pirsumei Nisa and Zechiras Amalek. But like the Sefer HaChinuch, a woman's chayav in Megillah is only going to be Pirsumei Nisa, Afein Hayu B'Oso Aneis. It's not going to be Zechiras Amalek, because women are not chayaves in Zechiras Amalek. If you assume the Bahag follows the Chinuch. Again, the Bahag was earlier, but the sheet, he follows the sheet of the Chinuch. Memela like this. The same logic that says, if I am pater from a mitzvah, I can't be mitzvah you. Right, that's clear? Would also say, if I'm only chayav in one aspect of the mitzvah and not the other, I cannot be mitzvah a person who is chayav in both aspects of the mitzvah, because lagabe one of those aspects I am pater, even though I'm chayav in the other aspect. So Memela, the Bahag, is beautiful and logical. When a woman reads Megillah, assuming the Bahag holds like the Sefer HaChinuch, a woman is obligated only to be mefarsem the miracle. She's not obligated in remembering Amalek. The man who has to read Megillah is chayav in both Pirsumei Nisa and Zechiras Amalek. A woman cannot be mitzvah a man, because on that aspect of the Megillah reading, that is a fulfillment of remembering Amalek, she is pater. And that's why she cannot be mitzvah. Now, you may ask me, but our Piskei Halacha seem to be inconsistent. We tell women, go to Parshasaka, you're chayav in the midst of remembering Amalek. We then tell women, oh, you shouldn't read Megillah for your husband, and the lumdus will be because you're not chayav in Zechiras Amalek. Well, mimanavshach. If a woman is chayav in Parshasaka, she's chayav in remembering Amalek, let her be mitzvah your husband. And if you're telling me she can't be mitzvah your husband because she's not chayavet in Zechiras Amalek, like the Maclocus is explaining, then why does she have to go to Parshasaka? In other words, these two halachas are inconsistent. We tell women to go to Parshasaka, and then we say, don't read for your husband. Why not? Contradiction. But the answer is it's not really a contradiction. It simply means that we have not been machriya the halacha. We are mesupak. Is the halacha like the Sefer Chinuch that women are pater? Or is the halacha like other Rishonim that women are chayavis? Memela, we have to be machmir on both sides of the equation. I tell a woman that she has to hear Parshasaka because maybe the halacha is not like the Sefer Chinuch, and women are chayavos. Maybe, therefore go. On the other hand, we tell a woman not to read Megillah for her husband because maybe the halacha is like the Sefer Chinuch. So this is not unusual. When you have a shaila in halacha, you sometimes have to be machmer on both sides, even though your chumras are inconsistent and contradictory. Yes, it is true. If I tell a woman to go to Parshasaka and then tell her she shouldn't read Megillah for a man, I am contradicting myself. Because going to Parshasaka presupposes a woman is chayeves in Zechira. Not reading Magilla, like the Maclocus at least, is presupposing a woman is not chayeves in Zechira. So which is it? The answer is, we don't know which it is. We're mesupik. Because we're mesupik, we are machriya l'chumra on both sides of the equation. She should go to Parshasaka, she shouldn't read Megillah. But this is the Maclocus as you cite, and it presupposes, the Bahag does not say this beferish at all. It presupposes that you understand the Bahag based on the Shita of the Sefer HaChinuch. Yeah.
I would imagine, unless there's some other reason also, that she also can't motzi her husband in Parshat Zachor.
That's correct, for the same reason. That would be exactly right. She has to hear it because maybe she's chayeves. She can't be mitzi because maybe she's not chayeves. Exactly the same thing. So now, though, Marcheshes comes up with a real interesting chiddush, which perhaps a feminist orientation might like. We know that we have to read Megillah both at night and in the day. Now, interestingly enough, the Turei Even is the Shagas Aryeh. In addition to the Shagas Aryeh, one of the greatest Achronim in the time of the Vilna Gaon. So in addition to the Shagas Aryeh, he wrote Turei Even on 3 Masechtas, Rosh Hashanah, Chagiga, and Magilla. And Turei Even is one of the real classic Svarim. And the Turei Even says, we won't go to the Rayas right now, that although there's a chiyuv to read Megillah at night and in the day is different than the night, because the original takana of Mordechai and Esther was only a daytime reading. The nighttime reading was added later in the time of the Amoraim, and that is why if you learn the Mishnayos of Maseches Megillah, go through every line of the Mishnah, you will not find a single reference to Megillah at night. It only talks about Megillah during the day. And you'd have a real question. Why doesn't the Mishnah mention Megillah at night? The Turei Even's answer was that as late as the time of the Mishnah, they didn't read Megillah at night because the takana of Mordechai and Esther was only in the day. And later, in the time of the Amoraim, they added night. And that's why the Mishnah Mamash doesn't mention night. Because of this, although they're both D'Rabbanan, the daytime Megillah reading is considered to be more important. In fact, it's interesting. You get a general feeling that many people intuitively think the other way. Night is the big deal, day, okay, got to go to work, so I'll miss Megillah. Okay, a firm person doesn't have that cheshbon. But certainly people who are less religious, they'll make a bigger deal of going to the night reading than the next morning. The next morning is kind of anticlimactic. But in reality, it's the opposite. The morning Megillah is a takana of the Anshe Knesses Agdola. The night reading is a later takanas Chachamim. Okay, but here is what the Marcheshes brings. The Marcheshes brings from Rashi in Shavuos that even a milchemes mitzvah, even a war that we are commanded to wage against the 7 nations of Canaan or against Amalek, we do not fight milchemes mitzvahs at night. Now, obviously, if we're attacked, we do, but we don't aggressively maintain a milchemes mitzvah at night. So it turns out, according to Rashi, the mitzvah of eradicating Amalek does not apply at night. You don't have to kill Amalekim at night. Now, if you go with the chinuch, that whenever there's no mitzvah of eradication, there's no mitzvah of zechira, it would also stand to reason, if there's no mitzvah of mechia at night, there is no mitzvah of zechira at night. So it turns out, number one, you wouldn't be Yitzchak Parshasaka at night, okay? But number two, that also means Megillah at night, even for a man, only has one element rather than 2 elements. Pirsume Nisa, and not Amalek. Memela, at night, men and women are equal. So the Marcheshes wants to be Mechadesh, get total Chiddush, that which the Bahag says, a woman cannot read for a man, is only the Krias HaMegillah of the day. Because in the day, the Megillah of the man encompasses Pirsume Nisa and Zechiras Amalek. And the Marcheshes, the Bahag, holds like the Sefer Achinuch, that women don't have the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek. So a woman cannot be mitzi a man in that aspect of Megillah reading. But at night, the Megillah reading is only because of Persumei Nisa, because there is no mitzvah even for a man of Zechiras Amalek at night. So Memela, the man's Megillah reading is only because of Persumei Nisa. So Memela, a woman is equal to a man. Tremendous chiddush. So the Marchesha says, even like the Bahag, a woman can be moitzi, a man, in the Megillah at night. Very, very lovely chiddush. Again, the Bahag is not talking about a woman reading to a crowd of men where you have an issue of kol isha and mechitza, right? So factor out those particular issues. We're talking about a simple situation where a woman wants to read to her husband. And at night, there's a makom to say in halacha. Well, first of all, let me point out that the Bahag himself is not muskim. I mean, there are shitas that say a woman can always read for a man. Remember, the Marcheshes is explaining the Bahag. But the Bahag is not the only shita. So if you don't hold of the Bahag, a woman could always read for a man. But the Marcheshes' chiddush is, this is the Marcheshes' chiddush, even if we're machmer like the Bahag, which we are lechatchila, but that would only be a chisaron with the Krias HaMegillah of Yom. It would not be a chisaron with the Krias HaMegillah Balayla. Yeah.
If we say that at nighttime there's no chiyuv of eradicating
Amalek. Yeah.
Therefore, according to the Bahag, there's also no chiyuv of remembering.
That's correct.
Our men also. So how
That's
can
right.
men have women yotzi balayla?
No, that's what he's saying. So there's no mitzvah even by men, right? So why are we reading Megillah at night? Only because of Persumei Nisa. So Persumei Nisa is a common denominator between men and women. Men can be mitzi women in Persumei Nisa. Women can be mitzi men in Persumei Nisa, right? In other words, we're not saying there's no mechiyev of Megillah. We're just saying Megillah is because of the Nes and not because of the Amalek anymore. Okay, so that's something to think in mind. Again, a beautiful, beautiful hezber. Now, one thing. Is there a problem with women reading for women? Right? A woman wants to read for a woman. Just no men, no kolisha. One woman reads for 100 women. Is there any problem with that? So l'chaira, there's vaday no problem, because all women are equally chayav, whatever it is, and day, night, whatever it is. So for sure, there is no halachic problem with a woman reading for other women. Still, there are some rabbanim, and in more modern Orthodox circles, there'll sometimes be Megillah, again, well, if you're really, really left-wing or beyond the pale, they'll have a woman reading for men, which is totally improper. But in moderately modern circles, you'll sometimes have a women's Megillah reading for women. By women, for women. So the question is there any problem with that? Like, what's the problem? So halachically, there actually is no problem. But here is what some poskim say. L'chatchila, it is best to always read Megillah with a minyan. Now, b'diavad, that's okay. B'diavad, even without a minyan, you make the brachos, everything is fine. But l'chatchila, a Megillah should be with a minyan. So here's the argument. Since women do not count for a minyan, so even if you have 100 women, you don't have a minyan. So the problem with a women's only Megillah reading is it's equivalent to reading the Megillah b'yachidus, which is not a problem with brachos. You can make all the brachos. A woman can make the brachos, but you don't have the maila of Megillah b'minyan. This would be the argument why we wouldn't encourage a women's minyan. But let me tell you that there is an alternative approach here, and that is the following. Kedusha needs a minyan, and Megillah, l'chatchila, should have a minyan, right? True. But the function of minyan for Kaddish and Kedusha is not the same function as minyan for Megillah. You want to say? Yeah.
If for a woman the only obligation is Krias, then surely then if a woman's a bit like the there's no like how's that Krias?
Well, The truth, so the truth of the matter is, and of course you can ask the same kasha about a man at night. It's also persume nes. So persume nes can even mean to yourself. Persume nes even means to be moved. So even if you're the only one, that's called a persume nisa too. Even though the word persume means publicize, but that's nichlal to you yourself. So here's the thing. By Kaddish and Kedusha, the reason why you have to have a minyan is because the Devarim that are called Kedusha need a minyan. And on that, women are not counted for a minyan. That's true. But Megillah does not need a minyan because it's like Kedusha. Megillah needs a minyan because since Persume Nisa is optimally when there's some publicity, so a minyan is the minimum quantity of publicity. On publicity, women do count for a minyan. Meaning, the Persume Nisa of Asara does not require a halachic minyan, and women could be counted. In fact, one could even say 5 men and 5 women would count as a minyan for Mikra Megillah. And one might even say 5 men and 5 children, assuming they're old enough to understand. In other words, a minyan of Persume Nisa does not have to have the halachas of a minyan. And memela, a women's group would qualify as a minyan for Megillah purposes, even if it would not qualify as a minyan for Devarim Shebikdusha. Which means, in effect, there is a strong halachic basis that would support a women's only reading. Now, but the evidence vaday kosher, there's no possible way that this wouldn't be valid. That's for sure. But I'm saying, but even the lechatchila idea of having a minyan, legabe Megillah, this would qualify as or this might qualify at least, as a minyan. In fact, even ketanim might be mitztarif and the like. So that's kind of the background of this very, very interesting issue. In fact, that would also mean that if a man is reading to a group of 10 women, he would not have to go to the effort of hearing or reading Megillah in a regular minyan, because the minyan of women could count as his minyan, because it's a minyan of Persume Nisa. I mean, most of the time, the way it works is the Baal Koreh will try to read in a regular minyan. Again, I guess the Chumrah, that's fine, but it could be that the minyan of the women itself would count, because you have to be machalek between a minyan that is needed for Devarim Shebikdusha versus a minyan that is needed for Persume Nisa Bialma, in which women could count, ketanim could count. One might even be mitzadid goyim, but I wouldn't go that far. That's a little too radical. Okay, alrighty. So we'll see you tomorrow, and be well.